Hello from under the sea on the west coast of Ireland. My name is Alec Reid, and behind me you are looking at the reef restoration work for the Galway Bay native oyster restoration project. I work on this project for an organisation named Cuan, and alongside the Marine Institute of Ireland, as well as Bordisci NORA, we coordinate the Galway Bay native oyster restoration project, which is funded by the European Maritime Fishery Fund. And today's presentation will be very brief, but my contact details will be available for anyone who would like to learn more, and please feel free to get in contact with me to do so. Thank you to Feline, thank you to the NORA 3 team for giving us the opportunity to present today. I will share my screen and we can get talking about oysters. So this is what we look like, and this is where we are. This is the west coast of Ireland, and we are situated in between counties Galway and County Clare. We operate out of an area there called the St. George's Oyster Fishery Bed, and that is where our native oyster restoration site is. Some of the overhead facts of what we do. So we have 46 hectares of oyster restoration ground. In 2020, we deployed 200 tons of Pacific Gigas oyster shell cultch for reef restoration. We have 2 on-land spatting ponds in which we produce native oyster seed. We have 350 wild oyster surface spat collectors in which we monitor oyster settlement in the water column. And this year, over a 16-week period, we monitored 500 native oysters for gonad monitoring to see at which stage of larval development they were at. And these have been the fundamental works we've undercarried in 2020 so far. And here is a closer look at our native oyster restoration sites. So they are located here in the St. George's Oyster Fishery Bed, just outside of the intertidal zone. We have 2 sites, a north site and a south site. Each expands approximately 40 meters in diameter, and we deployed 120 tons of cultch at the north site and 80 tons of cultch at the south site in 2020. Gonad monitoring. This year we put a big emphasis on gonad monitoring because gonad monitoring allows you to understand in depth when oysters are producing larvae and when that larvae is being released into the water column. And this is what will inform all other activities for restoration. So this tells you the best time when to put the cultch in the water, because you don't want to go too early with your cultch deployment, because there's a chance you might get your cultch covered in seaweeds or sediment or other settlements, and you don't want to go too late naturally with your cultch deployment because you might miss your larvae altogether. So to understand how the oysters are reproducing in Galway Bay, what stresses affect their larval disbursement, and what stages their larva disbursement is likely to take place is a very important practice to informing the rest of your oyster restoration works. Cultch deployment. This year we deployed 200 tons of oyster shell cultch. The cultch was supplied to us from Irish oyster farms and had been weathered for 4 years to ensure that there was no biosecurity risk to deploy in that cultch. Oyster shell cultch is a very good cultch to use, especially Pacific Gigas, because it's very durable, it's very hard, and it will last a very long time. It doesn't necessarily give the best shape oysters that would traditionally service native oyster seafood markets. However, there's no issue for the oysters attaching themselves to it, which is a benefit for oyster restoration, because the shapes those oysters grow into, they are then not sought after, and there is no incentive to fish on the restoration ground. We also deployed 350 surface spat collectors on a mussel raft to see if there's any different in settlement at the surface of the water column as opposed to the cultch we deployed on the reef bed. And we have also undertaken with Iarla Canellan 2 spatting ponds in counties Clare, because although you can do your absolute best in the wild, due to temperature and salinity, you might see per settlement. And when the goal is reef restoration, that extra boost of oysters which you've produced in ponds, which can then be distributed on the restoration site, really does give an extra boost to the conservation efforts and the reintroduction efforts. Thank you very much for listening. That is my contact details. It's Alec at cuanbio.com. Please get in contact. We love talking about oysters. We love to hear from you. Thank you very much to Feline and to NORA 3, and please enjoy the rest of the presentations.